Imagine a night in 1859 Virginia, where shadows whisper secrets of sin and retribution. A deaf slave, eyes like burning coals, stands silent amid the chaos as flames devour a plantation built on blood and broken souls. Was it vengeance, or divine judgment? Feel the heat. Hear the screams. This is no accident, it's a reckoning from the depths of hell itself. The air hung heavy that fateful August night in 1859, thick with the metallic tang of impending storm and the acrid bite of smoldering tobacco leaves. The Harrove Plantation, nestled like a serpent in the cradle of Virginia's tidewater marshes, had stood for generations as a monument to human greed, a sprawling scar on the earth where the James River's murky fingers clawed at the soil. But on the 14th, as the moon hid behind bruised clouds, a fire erupted that wasn't born of careless sparks or earthly mishaps. No, this blaze roared with a fury that seemed summoned from the Old Testament itself, like the flames that consumed Sodom, a divine torch ignited to purge the wicked. Witnesses from neighboring farms, huddled in their doorways miles away, swore the horizon glowed like the gates of perdition opening wide. 12 miles distant, they claimed, you could feel the heat prickling your skin, hear the distant pops of timber surrendering to the inferno. By the time the first gray light of dawn pierced the smoke, the plantation was a graveyard of ash. Skeletal beams jutted from the ruins like the ribs of a fallen beast, blackened and brittle. 17 souls perished in that Holocaust, 16 enslaved men, women, and children, their bodies twisted in eternal agony amid the embers, and one white overseer, his form charred beyond recognition, as if the fire had sought him out with personal malice. The county sheriff, a portly man named Elias Thorne, arrived 3 days later on a sway-backed horse, his boots kicking up dust from the scorched road. He scribbled his report in a leather-bound ledger, the ink bleeding slightly on the damp pages, accidental blaze, initiated by an overturned lantern in the tobacco barn. No foul play suspected. It was tidy, official, wrapped in the neat bow of Southern propriety. But the survivors, those few enslaved who had fled into the night, their faces smeared with soot and tears, knew better. In the dim glow of hidden campfires, far from white ears, they murmured a tale that chilled the blood. It spoke of Thomas, a young deaf man whose silence masked a storm of righteous fury, of Virgil Krenshaw, an overseer whose sadism echoed the Pharaoh's whip in Exodus, and of a meticulously orchestrated cataclysm that blurred the line between human revenge and heavenly wrath. Historians today, poring over faded letters and fragmented diaries in climate-controlled archives, still debate the truth. Was it murder cloaked in flames? A slave's desperate bid for freedom? Or something more profound, a manifestation of divine justice, where the sins of the fathers were visited upon the sons in a blaze of biblical retribution? What remains undisputed is the intent. Someone engineered that destruction. Someone orchestrated death with the precision of a clockmaker winding doom. And someone emerged from the ashes unscathed, their skin untouched by fire, as if shielded by an angelic hand. This story isn't just history, it's a parable of the soul's dark corridors, where guilt festers like untreated wounds, and redemption comes not in whispers, but in roars of flame. Pause for a moment, viewer. If you're watching this from the shadowed corners of the American South, where antebellum mansions still loom like guilty ghosts over cotton fields turned to suburbs, drop a comment below. What state holds your roots? These narratives aren't mere echoes of the past, they're the spiritual undercurrents shaping our present, uncomfortable truths that demand reflection. And if this tale already grips your heart like a vice, smash that subscribe button, because what unfolds next will unravel your notions of justice, sin, and the thin veil between mortal vengeance and God's unyielding judgment. Let us journey back, then, to the Virginia of 1859, a land steeped in the contradictions of liberty and bondage. The Tidewater region, 40 miles south of Richmond, was a labyrinth of rivers and swamps, where the James splintered into vein-like tributaries that nourished vast tobacco empires. The air there carried the perpetual scent of damp earth and fermenting leaves, mingled with the sweat of laborers whose chains were as invisible as they were ironclad. This was old colonial ground, claimed in the early 1700s by English adventurers chasing fortunes in the New World. They cleared the ancient pine forests, drained the marshes, and planted seeds that would bloom into a system of exploitation as enduring as the oaks that lined the riverbanks. The Harrove Plantation embodied this legacy, a 300-acre domain where productivity dictated destiny. The soil, worn thin in patches from a century of relentless harvesting, gleamed fertile in others, a mosaic of prosperity and decay. The Harrove family teetered on the edge of middling wealth, not the opulent dynasties like the Randolphs, with their sprawling estates and legions of enslaved, but far from the ragged poverty that claimed lesser planters. Edmund Harrove's grandfather had staked his claim in 1732, funded by profits from a Norfolk shipping venture that trafficked in rum, molasses, and human cargo. He oversaw the construction of the main house, a two-story edifice of red brick and weathered clapboard, its white paint peeling like shedding skin under the relentless sun. The wide veranda faced east, capturing the dawn's golden hues and the river's cooling whispers at dusk, a facade of gentility masking the brutality within. Fields stretched out like supplicant arms, half under cultivation, yielding tobacco as the cash crop, interspersed with corn for sustenance, wheat for market, and modest vegetable patches near the quarters. Behind the house lay an orchard heavy with apples and peaches, their branches gnarled like arthritic fingers, and a forlorn vineyard planted by Edmund's father in a burst of misguided ambition. The grapes clung stubbornly to the vines, tart and fragile, destined more for acrid vinegar than fine wine, a symbol, perhaps, of the plantation's own souring dreams. In this microcosm of antebellum hell, 23 enslaved souls toiled, aged from the innocence of 6 to the weary wisdom of 62. Their world was confined to 6 log cabins, huddled in dual rows behind the tobacco barns like forgotten sentinels. These dwellings were crude testaments to deprivation, walls of hewn timber chinked with mud and moss, floors of packed dirt that turned to slurry in rainstorms, shutters of splintered wood barring the elements instead of glass panes. Each hearth flickered with meager flames for cooking and warmth, while lofts overhead cradled children on prickly straw pallets, their dreams haunted by the creak of chains and the whip's distant crack. Life here possessed a fragile stability, unlike the auction block chaos of larger operations. Edmund Harrove, a man in his late 50s scarred by loss, seldom sold kin apart unless desperation clawed at his ledgers. His wife had perished 2 decades prior in childbirth, taking their only son to the grave, a wound that left him widowed and heirless, retreating to a Richmond townhouse on Gray Street and a bank directorship. He visited monthly, his carriage rumbling down the rutted lane, to scrutinize yields and accounts. Not cruel by the era's barbaric measure, nor benevolent, he viewed his property through a merchant's lens, enslaved as assets to be preserved, like prized stallions or sharpened plows. Yet one shadow loomed over this rhythm, the sale of 1851. A blighted harvest and foolish speculations had forced Edmund to relinquish 3 young men to a deep South trader. The memory lingered like a specter, mothers' keening wails piercing the twilight, chains clinking as the trio was marched away, faces etched with despair. It was a stark sermon on fragility, their lives mere pawns in a game of economic roulette, where sin's arithmetic tallied souls as debits. Daily existence pulsed with grueling predictability. Tobacco demanded devotion, seedlings nursed in April beds, transplanted under blistering May suns, topped and suckered through humid summers, harvested in September's haze. Rations sustained but starved the spirit, cornmeal ground coarse, salt pork fatty and sparse, molasses sticky sweet, augmented by garden scraps of collards and beans. Clothing arrived biannually, rough-spun shirts and trousers for men, calico dresses and shawls for women, hand-me-down rags for the young until field labor claimed them at 12. Edmund's absences thrust oversight onto hired hands. For 2 years, William Porter, a local yeoman's son, steady but uninspired, had maintained order. Yields dipped gradually, irking Edmund until spring 1857, when he ousted Porter for Virgil Krenshaw, endorsed by a neighboring planter eager to expel his own poison. Krenshaw arrived like a plague bearer, 32 and gaunt, his pale blue eyes cold as winter streams, his face a mask etched in perpetual scorn. Born to North Carolina dirt farmers who forfeited their holdings to debt when he was 15, he clawed upward through 15 years of itinerant oversight, drifting across the Carolinas and Virginia like a vagrant storm. No post lasted beyond 2 seasons, quarrels with masters, incidents with the enslaved, abrupt departures veiled in whispers. His trail was one of shattered lives, a pattern evident to those who dared look. Krenshaw thrived on dominion, his soul twisted like Cain's after the first murder, reveling in the subjugation that mirrored humanity's original fall. Among the enslaved, his name evoked dread, disseminated through clandestine channels, market murmurs, preachers' coded sermons, spirituals laced with warnings. He savored power's intoxication, viewing those under his lash not as bearers of God's image, but beasts to tame, their suffering a sacrament to his ego. Upon arrival at Harrove, he prowled silently for a week, a predator assessing prey. He traversed fields at dawn, mist curling around His boots inspected barns where the scent of cured tobacco mingled with hay, pored over ledgers by candlelight, his quill scratching like talons. But his true scrutiny fell on the people, who labored with vigor, who lagged, who commanded respect in the quarters, who stood alone, familial bonds ripe for severing. His inaugural address came on a Sunday afternoon. The enslaved assembled in the barnyard under a sky heavy with promise of rain. Krenshaw perched on his cottage porch, voice silky yet serrated, like a blade sheathed in velvet. "I am Virgil Krenshaw, your new overseer," he intoned, eyes sweeping the crowd like a reaper's scythe. "Past rules are dust. Mine are etched in stone, work relentlessly, swiftly, without murmur. Obey, and peace reigns. Defy, and regret will be your constant companion. I offer no mercy, no reprises." Silence met his words, a collective breath held against provocation. His lips curved in a mirthless grin, shadows playing across his angular features. "Wise. Disperse. Tomorrow, judgment begins." That evening, in cabin glows dim as embers, voices dipped low in prayer and plotting. They recognized his ilk overseers whose cruelty was a badge, harbingers of amplified quotas, whimsical torments, an aura of perpetual dread. Yet they underestimated the abyss of his depravity, the lengths he'd plumb in pursuit of control. Within months, Krenshaw remade Harrove into a forge of efficiency and terror. He segmented workers into squads by vigor and age, dictating quotas with iron rigor, so many rows hoed, leaves stripped, barns filled. Failures invoked penalties, rations slashed to starvation's edge, overtime in sweltering sheds, isolation in a windowless pen behind his abode, its air stale with despair. Graver sins, insolence, flight attempts, disputes, drew the lash, administered with calculated restraint to avoid crippling labor assets. Crenshaw's ledger balanced pain with productivity, a devil's arithmetic. But his mastery lay in the psyche's shadows. Like a serpent in Eden, he probed vulnerabilities, a mother's fierce love, a lover's tender bond, pride's brittle shell, hope's flickering flame. He cultivated paranoia, sowing discord with fabricated betrayals. He ratted you out for slacking, watching alliances fracture like dry clay. Privileges dangled as bait, an extra cornbread hunk, a reprieve from dawn toil, a rare conjugal visit across fences. These favors, broadcasted slyly, bred envy, turning kin against kin. Collective punishments for individual lapses forced self-policing, a panopticon of mutual suspicion. Yields soared 30% in 1858, earning Edmund's commendation in coin. He inquired not into methods, blind to the moral rot, much like Pilate washing hands of innocent blood. Yet one enigma eluded Crenshaw's grasp: Thomas. Born in 1841's vernal thaw, Thomas was Ruth's child, the cook whose culinary alchemy graced Edmund's table. Fatherless by declaration, paternity a perilous query in bondage's web, Thomas embodied Ruth's unyielding devotion. A prenatal fever, born of July's merciless heat as Ruth slaved over stoves, stole his hearing. She collapsed amid sizzling pans, the doctor's verdict ignored in favor of unrelenting toil. Thomas emerged premature, frail, his world eternally mute. In another era, deafness might doom a child to discard, but Ruth's indispensability shielded him. She nurtured utility, from toddlerhood, he mimed tasks, proving worth. Their bond forged a silent lexicon, gestures evolving from crude points to eloquent dances of hands and expressions. Quarters folk adopted basics, Thomas mastered lip reading, decoding speech from mouth's subtle choreography. His impairment granted paradoxical freedoms. Exempt from field shouts, he labored in barns and forges, solitary realms where autonomy bloomed. Here, amid hammer rings he couldn't hear but felt in vibrations, he overheard unguarded tongues. Whites, deeming him dim, bared secrets, crop schemes. Illicit affairs, escape plots whispered in his deaf presence. He absorbed like a sponge, faces micro-twitches, postures betrayals, gestures unspoken volumes, amassing knowledge as a hidden arsenal. By 18, Thomas stood medium-built, wiry from toil, his mother's cheekbones framing eyes deep as abyssal wells. Intelligence shimmered beneath his stoic veneer, a watchful patience akin to Job's endurance amid trials. Smiles were rare, but when they broke, they illuminated like dawn after apocalypse, hinting at buried vulnerability. Krenshaw assaulted this fortress relentlessly, feudal labors like Sisyphean brick halls, false theft accusations starving him thin, threats to exile Ruth southward, severing their sacred tie. Each barb aimed at shattering spirit, invoking sin's cycle, oppressor's hubris inviting downfall. Yet Thomas endured, unbowed. His silence wasn't submission but strategy, a brewing tempest veiled in calm. In his gaze, Krenshaw glimpsed not fear, but a mirror of his own damnation, a silent promise of retribution, echoing Proverbs' warning, the wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion. The overseer's manipulations faltered here, seeds of doubt sprouting in his soul. Was Thomas merely resilient, or a vessel for higher judgment? The plantation's air grew thicker, charged with omens, unusual bird flocks wheeling overhead, river waters turning inexplicably red at sunset, whispers of ancestral spirits stirring in the marshes. As summer's heat peaked, tensions simmered like a pot over flames. Crenshaw's regime, a microcosm of slavery's grand iniquity, invited cosmic rebuke. Biblical echoes abounded, the enslaved as Israelites under Pharaoh, Krenshaw as the taskmaster whose heart hardened like stone. Thomas, deaf yet perceiving, embodied the still small voice of conscience ignored. His endurance wasn't passive, it was a gathering of forces, a spiritual alchemy transmuting suffering into something potent, inevitable. Nights in the quarters, under star-pricked skies, prayers rose silent and spoken. Ruth's hand signed psalms to Thomas, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." Others murmured of signs, a comet streaking weeks prior, interpreted as heavenly fire impending. Krenshaw, sensing the shift, doubled patrols, his lantern casting elongated shadows like accusatory fingers. But blindness to the divine blinded him to the brewing storm. In this cauldron, guilt's weight pressed on all. Edmund, absentee lord, bore the sin of omission, his wealth stained by unacknowledged blood. Krenshaw, active agent, wallowed in sadistic pride, each lash a nail in his spiritual coffin. The enslaved grappled with despair's temptation, yet flickers of hope persisted, rooted in faith's promise of deliverance. Thomas, at the vortex, pondered justice's scales. His deafness amplified inner vision, attuning him to moral rhythms unheard by others. Dreams plagued him, visions of fire-purging fields, screams swallowed by silence, a figure, perhaps angelic, guiding his hand. Was he chosen, like Moses, to lead Exodus through flames? Or merely human, driven by earthly rage toward damnation? The plantation's daily grind masked this undercurrent. Dawn horns, felt by Thomas as ground tremors, roused workers to fields where tobacco leaves rustled like accusatory whispers. Meals in cabins, shared in dim light, carried undertones of conspiracy. Crenshaw's gaze, ever vigilant, missed the subtle signs, a glance exchanged, a tool misplaced accidentally, small acts of sabotage accumulating like kindling. Spiritually, the place reeked of desecration. The orchard's fruits, once symbols of Eden's bounty, now withered under neglect, mirroring souls starved of grace. The vineyard's sour grapes evoked Isaiah's vineyard parable, a people expected to yield justice, producing instead wild grapes of oppression. Divine retribution loomed, not as abstract theology, but palpable dread, the air humming with electricity before a strike. As August approached, omens intensified. A barn owl perched daily on Crenshaw's porch, its hoots, unheard by Thomas but described in signs, portending death. River fogs lingered unnaturally, veiling paths like shrouds. Thomas, in the forge's heat, hammered iron with rhythmic fury, each strike a prayer for release. Krenshaw, unnerved yet defiant, escalated cruelties. A young girl flogged for spilling water, her cries echoing biblical laments. A man confined for laziness, emerging hollow-eyed, spirit-fractured. Yet Thomas remained enigma, his endurance a thorn in the overseer's side, pricking conscience's remnants. In quiet moments, Ruth signed to her son of redemption's hope, "The Lord sees the afflicted, he hears their cry." Thomas nodded, his eyes reflecting flames not yet kindled. The stage was set for cataclysm, where human sin met divine fire, and silence would speak loudest of all. The summer of 1859 pressed down on Harrove Plantation like the weight of unconfessed sins, the air a stifling shroud woven from humidity and unspoken horrors. Late July brought relentless heat, the mercury climbing past 90 degrees for days on end, turning the earth into a furnace that scorched bare feet and wilted the spirit. Tobacco fields shimmered under a merciless sun, leaves drooping like weary penitents, despite the enslaved workers' desperate efforts to quench them with river water hauled in splintered buckets. Breath came shallow, thoughts fogged, bodies pushed to the brink of collapse, yet endurance was not a choice, but a mandate etched in the scars of whips and the echoes of auction blocks. In the tobacco barn, a cavernous structure of weathered oak beams and tin roofing that amplified the heat like a devil's kiln, Thomas labored in relative solitude. The air inside clung thick and sweet, saturated with the fermenting aroma of hanging leaves, their edges curling brown in the curing process. Dust motes danced in slanted shafts of light piercing through cracked walls, illuminating the rhythmic dance of his hands as he ascended a rickety ladder, bundling foliage onto high racks. For Thomas, this isolation was a fragile sanctuary away from the field's cacophony he couldn't hear but felt in the ground's vibrations, free from Crenshaw's constant predation. Here, in the barn's muffled embrace, he moved at his own cadence, his deafness a shield against the overseer's barked commands. But on that Tuesday afternoon, as sweat traced rivulets down his spine, soaking his threadbare shirt, the sanctuary shattered. A flicker of motion at the doorway caught his eye, a shadow elongating across the dirt floor like a serpent uncoiling. Thomas paused, bundle in hand, and peered down. Virgil Krenshaw strode in, his lean frame casting a long, ominous silhouette, followed by Sarah, a 19-year-old woman whose presence radiated quiet strength inherited from her father, Jacob, the blacksmith whose forge hammered out survival in iron and resolve. Sarah's belly swelled with 7 months of life, her loose cotton dress draping over the curve like a protective veil, her steps measured and heavy, as if each carried the weight of 2 souls. Her husband, Daniel, toiled in the distant fields until dusk painted the horizon crimson, leaving her vulnerable in this moment. Thomas's gaze sharpened, reading the scene like a forbidden scripture, Crenshaw's hand on the door, slamming it shut with a thud that vibrated through the floorboards into Thomas's feet. The overseer's face twisted in a leer that spoke of base desires, eyes gleaming with the predatory hunger of a man who viewed bodies as property to claim. Hidden partially by the dangling leaves, their scent cloying and overpowering, Thomas froze, his heart pounding a silent drum. Crenshaw's lips moved, words lost to Thomas's ears but etched in the overseer's posture, the squared shoulders, the invasive lean. Sarah's face, visible in profile, drained of color, her eyes widening in terror that mirrored Eve's in the garden, confronted by temptation's serpent. She retreated a step, hand cradling her unborn child, but Krenshaw blocked her, his frame a barrier of flesh and authority. Thomas strained, piecing together fragments from lip movements. Been watching you, time you showed gratitude, light work for your condition. The words, inferred from cruel twists of mouth, ignited a fire in Thomas's chest, a righteous blaze against the abomination unfolding. Sarah shook her head, signing denial with her body, hands shielding her womb as if warding off demonic possession. Whatever plea escaped her lips, it enraged Krenshaw, his jaw clenched, veins bulging like cords of judgment, and he seized her arm, fingers bruising skin in a grip that evoked the nails of crucifixion. In that instant, instinct overrode caution. Thomas descended the ladder soundlessly, rungs familiar under calloused soles, his breath controlled, eyes locked on the violation. The barn's heat pressed in, amplifying the moral outrage, a microcosm of slavery's grand iniquity, where power corrupted absolutely, tempting overseers to play God over the vulnerable. Reaching the ground, he approached, tapping Crenshaw's shoulder with deliberate calm. The overseer whirled, surprise flashing across his features like lightning, his hold on Sarah unyielding. The trio stood suspended in the barn's hazy light, Krenshaw, embodiment of tyrannical sin, Sarah, innocent vessel of life, Thomas, the silent witness turned intervener. Dust swirled around them, the air thick with tension that hummed like a prelude to thunder. Thomas gestured pointedly to the ladder, the leaves, then Krenshaw, fabricating need for aid, a diversion born of quick wit. Sarah seized the moment, wrenching free, her footsteps hasty on the dirt as she fled toward the door, not daring a backward glance. The barn exhaled as she escaped, leaving Thomas alone with the fury in Crenshaw's eyes, cold blue orbs narrowing to slits, promising retribution. A thin smile crept across the overseer's lips, devoid of warmth, like the grin of Judas before betrayal. He leaned in, breath reeking of chewed tobacco and malice, enunciating slowly, "You just made a mistake, boy. A big one. And I'm going to make sure you regret it for the rest of your short life." Thomas met the gaze unflinching, his face a mask of stoic resolve, inner turmoil hidden like buried treasure. Krenshaw lingered a beat, then stormed out, the door banging shut, leaving Thomas in the oppressive heat, silence enveloping him like a shroud. The intervention wasn't heroism in tales of glory, it was a spark in powder keg, challenging the overseer's fragile ego, inviting a storm of vengeance that echoed biblical plagues upon the defiant. That night, under a moon veiled by clouds, Sarah sought refuge in Ruth and Thomas's cabin. The single room flickered with hearth light, shadows leaping on log walls chinked with mud. Tears carved paths down Sarah's cheeks, her hands trembling as she signed gratitude to Thomas, gestures fluid with emotion. Ruth enveloped her in arms strong from years of toil, whispering comforts while Thomas sat by the fire, flames reflecting in his eyes like portents of apocalypse. He stared into the embers, mind churning what retribution awaited. Krenshaw's type couldn't abide challenges, their dominion rested on terror's foundation, and any crack demanded swift, brutal repair. Thomas's intuition proved prophetic. Dawn brought escalation, Krenshaw's campaign a calculated siege to shatter body and soul. First, the well, a 30-foot abyss of stone slick with moss, its depths a festering tomb of decay, stagnant water 3 feet deep, mud laced with rotted leaves, vermin carcasses, discarded relics. The water soured, tainting rations, prompting Edmund's distant decree for cleansing. Thomas, lowered in a freight bucket, rope cinched around his waist like a noose of salvation, descended into chill dampness reeking of putrefaction. Hours blurred in scooping slime into hauled buckets, hands pruned and numb, back protesting the confined stoop. Emerging at sunset, filth-caked and shivering, he met Krenshaw's watchful smirk, a test of endurance, probing for weakness. Next day, roof repairs on the barn, tin sheets scorching under midday blaze, steep pitch a perilous incline where slips meant 20-foot plummets to unforgiving earth. Thomas navigated gingerly, hammering shingles, daubing tar that bubbled like brimstone, sweat-stinging eyes. Each step tempted fate, or Krenshaw's hope for accidental demise, a convenient erasure of the thorn in his side. Then, grain hauls, 100-pound sacks from shed to mill, half-mile treks repeated 20 times, burden bowing shoulders, legs quaking under strain. By dusk, muscles screamed, gait faltered, yet Thomas pressed on, refusing collapse. Krenshaw observed from afar, eyes hungry for breakage, but Thomas's resilience mocked him, a living testament to the spirit's unyielding flame. Physical torment wasn't enough, Krenshaw assaulted the psyche, slashing rations under fabricated theft accusations. Half cornmeal, no pork, starvation's slow knife, twisting guilt in Ruth's heart as she offered shares, rebuffed by Thomas's protective refusal. He thinned, cheeks hollowing like a fasting prophet, eyes retreating into shadowed sockets, yet labor continued, gaze upon Krenshaw steady, unsettling the overseer like a mirror reflecting his own damned soul. The quarters buzzed with whispered solidarity and dread. Sarah's rescue circulated in coded murmurs during water breaks, admiration mingled with fear, Thomas's bravery a beacon, but inviting collective peril. Sarah wrestled guilt's chains, her swelling belly a reminder of the life preserved at his cost. Daniel seethed, fists clenched in impotence, knowing confrontation meant death, orphaning his family. Jacob, weathered blacksmith with anvil-scarred hands, counseled patience, survival through stoicism, overseers transient as storms. Yet even he fretted, Krenshaw's obsession hinted at a breaking point nearing. 3 weeks post-incident, escalation peaked, whipping decreed for insubordination, a farce given Thomas's mute obedience. Saturday afternoon, yard assembly, a spectacle of dominance, lashes to etch fear anew. Ruth stormed the main house, Edmund present for inspection, pleading on knees worn from scrubbing. He demurred, voice detached, discipline Krenshaw's domain, interference eroding order. Ruth retreated weeping, heart fracturing like parched clay. But providence, or cunning, intervened. Saturday dawn, Krenshaw awoke ablaze with fever, sudden as divine smite, shivers racking his frame, head throbbing, guts roiling. Bedridden, plans thwarted, he raged inwardly. By Sunday, malaise lifted, leaving paranoia of poison suspected, but elusive. Unbeknownst, Ruth's herbal knowledge, passed from her mother like sacred lore, deployed ipecac root in his coffee, emetic purge, dosed precisely to sicken, not slay. Attention averted disaster, she bought time, not resolution. Krenshaw redoubled vigilance, patrols tightening like a noose, suspicion poisoning the air. Conversations hushed, glances averted, oppression's fog denser, suffocating hope. Amidst, Thomas transformed, movements deliberate, eyes harboring glacial calculation when Krenshaw turned away. No longer mere survivor, he schemed, spirit hardening like steel in Jacob's forge. Ruth sensed it first, maternal bond attuned to his essence. Mid-August Sunday eve, sunset bleeding orange across the sky like sacrificial blood, she found him outside the cabin, stare fixed on Krenshaw's cottage, a sentinel's vigil. Unease prickled her skin, she sat, clasping his hand in calloused warmth. Silence stretched, broken by her signs, what occupies your thoughts? Thomas's response, deliberate as a verdict, fire. Literal, not parable visions of conflagration, purification by flame. Chill gripped Ruth despite lingering heat. Don't, she signed, tremors in fingers. They'll end you. He countered, they will regardless. Krenshaw ceases only at death or ruin. You know this. Denial faltered, truth resonated like gospel. The plantation teetered on apocalypse's edge, Thomas's resolve a harbinger echoing Moses before Pharaoh's fall, or Elijah calling fire from heaven. Sin's accumulation demanded reckoning, Crenshaw's lust and cruelty, Edmund's apathy, the system's rot. Spiritual undertones deepened dreams plagued Thomas of flames devouring barns, screams silenced in inferno, a guiding hand. Perhaps angelic, perhaps vengeful spirit of ancestors. Nights grew charged, owls hooting omens, winds whispering through pines like prayers unanswered. Quarters folk sensed shift, subtle acts of resistance blooming, tools misplaced, quotas subtly undermined. Sarah, guilt-laden, slipped extra cornbread to Thomas under moon's cover, a communion of solidarity. Daniel forged hidden blades in secret, preparation for unknown trials. Jacob hammered with renewed fervor, anvil rings like tolling bells. Krenshaw, paranoia festering, dreamed of shadows conspiring, waking sweat-soaked. His gaze on Thomas sharpened, sensing the threat in silence, a biblical standoff, David versus Goliath, where stones were plans, slings patience. The air hummed with inevitability, moral scales tipping. Guilt wove through all, Sarah's for the burden placed, Ruth's for birthing a son into bondage, Crenshaw's buried deep under denial. Redemption loomed distant, but justice's fire kindled, promising purge. Thomas, vessel of quiet wrath, pondered psalms and signs, the wicked plot against the righteous, but the Lord laughs from heaven. As days blurred, heat unrelenting, the plantation pulsed like a heart near failure. Spiritual chill settled despite swelter, ghosts of past atrocities stirring, divine retribution's breath on necks. Thomas's planning deepened, sketches in dirty raced at dawn, barn layouts, lantern placements, escape paths. Fire, symbol of hell's torment and heaven's cleanse, became obsession a tool for liberation or damnation? Perhaps angelic, perhaps vengeful spirit of ancestors. Nights grew charged, owls hooting omens, winds whispering through pines like prayers unanswered. Quarters folk sensed shift, subtle acts of resistance blooming, tools misplaced, quotas subtly undermined. Sarah, guilt-laden, slipped extra cornbread to Thomas under moon's cover, a communion of solidarity. Daniel forged hidden blades in secret, preparation for unknown trials. Jacob hammered with renewed fervor, anvil rings like tolling bells. Krenshaw, paranoia festering, dreamed of shadows conspiring, waking sweat-soaked. His gaze on Thomas sharpened, sensing the threat in silence, a biblical standoff, David versus Goliath, where stones were plans, slings patience. The air hummed with inevitability, moral scales tipping. Guilt wove through all, Sarah's for the burden placed, Ruth's for birthing a son into bondage, Crenshaw's buried deep under denial. Redemption loomed distant, but justice's fire kindled, promising purge. Thomas, vessel of quiet wrath, pondered psalms and signs, the wicked plot against the righteous, but the Lord laughs from heaven. As days blurred, heat unrelenting, the plantation pulsed like a heart near failure. Spiritual chill settled despite swelter, ghosts of past atrocities stirring, divine retribution's breath on necks. Thomas's planning deepened, sketches in dirty raced at dawn, barn layouts, lantern placements, escape paths. Fire, symbol of hell's torment and heaven's cleanse, became obsession a tool for liberation or damnation? Ruth prayed silently, hands clasped, for mercy, for intervention. Yet fate's will turned, inexorable as seasons. The incident's ripple widened, touching souls like a prophet's call. Endurance birthed resolve, oppression sowed its own destruction. In this crucible, themes eternal played, sin's wage death, but faith's fruit deliverance. The night of flames approached, shadows lengthening like fingers of judgment. Ruth's hands trembled as they formed the signs, the firelight dancing across her lined face like warnings from a prophet. She had witnessed too much in her years of servitude, bodies broken under the lash, spirits crushed beneath endless toil, lives extinguished by despair's quiet poison. She knew men like Virgil Krenshaw, their power a fragile edifice built on terror, sustained only by the certainty that defiance ended in ruin. To falter was to invite collapse. Her son's words lingered between them, fire. Not metaphor, not dream, literal, consuming, final. What will you do, she signed, dread coiling in her chest like smoke. Thomas's gaze drifted to the overseer's cottage, where lamplight now flickered in the windows, warm and mocking. Inside, Krenshaw likely sat at his rough table, fork in one hand, whiskey bottle in the other, plotting fresh cruelties for dawn. I don't know yet, Thomas replied in signs, slow and measured. But something will come. Over the following days, the idea crystallized in Thomas's mind like iron cooling in the forge. He turned it ceaselessly, probing for cracks, risks, contingencies, failures. The plan was stark in its simplicity, yet labyrinthine in peril. Krenshaw must perish, but not as murder. Murder invited investigation, chains, the noose. It had to mimic accident common on plantations, where lanterns tipped, forges sparked, summer storms birthed lightning, and tobacco barns, heavy with curing leaves, occasionally erupted in spontaneous flame. Fire, that ancient purifier, would serve as judge and executioner. A blaze in the tobacco barn would seem plausible, tragic yet unremarkable. If Krenshaw were trapped within, his death a casualty of carelessness, suspicion would glance off like rain on tin. Yet the cost haunted Thomas. 17 other souls lived and labored here, their cabins perilously close. Innocents, children, elders, kin could perish if flames leaped beyond the barn. He weighed this against the alternative, endless torment, broken bodies, souls ground to dust. No law shielded him. Edmund Harrove, absent in Richmond, cared only for profit. The community dared not act openly. Isolation forged resolve. He would act alone. The scheme coalesced, ignite late at night, when sleep claimed most, starting in the barn's cluttered rear where oil-soaked rags, dry straw, and forgotten timber waited like kindling. The fire would build slowly at first, granting time for escape if it spread. Imperfect, yes, variables abounded, but necessity birthed invention. Unbeknownst to Thomas, he was not alone in contemplating flames. Marcus, 30 and field-hardened, had arrived 5 years prior from North Carolina, sold after his former master's death. Quiet, observant, he kept distance yet missed nothing. He had watched Thomas endure Crenshaw's onslaught unbroken, unbowed, and recognized a kindred spirit, one who would pay any price for justice. Krenshaw targeted Marcus with special venom, hardest tasks, slashed rations, threats to sell him from Esther, the woman in the main house who held his heart. Marcus had pondered poison, knife and darkness, field accident, all flawed, all pointing to him, dooming Esther to solitude. But Thomas's lingering stares at the barn, the cold calculation in his eyes, spoke volumes. Marcus understood, fire was brewing. He chose patience, let the young man strike first. Success meant freedom without risk, failure meant his turn. Hannah, 25, labored in the kitchen with Ruth, born on Harrove soil, orphan young. She had grown alongside Thomas like an elder sister, protective and fierce. The barn incident with Sarah had seared her, hearing the pleas, frozen in fear, shamed by inaction until Thomas intervened. Since then, fire haunted her thoughts, the barn's dry bounty, a spark's inevitability, Crenshaw's entrapment. As kitchen worker, she lacked access, yet plotted, a hidden ember, an overlooked lantern. Details eluded her, but intent burned bright. On August 13th evening, opportunity arrived. Krenshaw drank heavily, more than customary, stumbling from porch to cottage around 9, bottle in hand. Thomas, lingering in the carpenter's shop, noted the sway, the slurred steps. He waited as the plantation quieted, lamps snuffed in cabins, main house dark, Edmund absent, elderly cleaners asleep in their quarters. A near full moon bathed the yard in silver, illuminating ruts and shadows Thomas knew by heart. He crossed to the barn, footsteps mute on packed earth, heart a steady drum. The door creaked open aloud in silence, he froze, senses straining. No alarm. Inside, he shut it gently. Moonlight striped the floor through wall gaps, tobacco's sweet cloying scent mingled with dust and aged timber. Thousands of leaves hung overhead, rustling like whispered prayers. Thomas navigated confidently, tools, supplies, hazards, all mapped in memory. In the rear storage, cluttered chaos of oil rags, straw bales, splintered wood, empty barrels, coiled rope, he worked swiftly. He piled rags against the main beam, scattered straw as tinder, arranged wood for updraft. A chimney of flame, designed to climb toward the leaves above. From a hook, he took Crenshaw's lantern, struck a match from the overseer's own box, lit the wick high, then tilted it, oil pooling on floorboards. 20, perhaps 30 minutes until ignition. Time enough to vanish, to frame accident. But Krenshaw must be inside. Bait required. Thomas exited, approached the cottage, windows now dark, Krenshaw abed, likely unconscious from liquor. He gathered stones, hurled one at the glass, sharp crack. Silence. Another. Another, gunshot echoes in night. Lamplight bloomed, silhouette lurched past window. Door opened. Krenshaw emerged, pants, undershirt, bare feet, hair wild, lantern in one hand, pistol in the other. "Who's there?" slurred, voice thick. "Show yourself or I shoot." Thomas stepped into lantern glow, hands raised, unarmed. He pointed urgently to the barn, gestures frantic, panic mind, mouth working soundlessly. Krenshaw squinted, suspicious, drunk. "What?" "Speak, boy." Thomas pointed again, beckoned, started toward the barn, glancing back imploringly. Krenshaw hesitated, responsibility weighed heavy in Harrove's absence. Crop damage, theft, fire, he'd answer for neglect. "This better not be a trick," he muttered, following, pistol trained on Thomas's back. They reached the barn. Thomas opened the door. Inside, orderly rows of leaves, gentle sway, no smoke, only familiar scents. Krenshaw entered, lantern aloft. "What the hell, nothing here." Thomas pointed deeper, toward storage, face contorted in feigned alarm. Krenshaw advanced, boots thudding, shadows leaping wildly. Thomas retreated, eased the door shut, dropped the heavy crossbeam, locking it fast. Shouts erupted inside, pounding fists. Thomas walked away, face impassive under moonlight, toward his cabin. Behind him, in the rear, leaking oil met flame. A soft whoosh, rags ignited, straw caught, wood flared. Flames licked upward, hungry, reaching the leaves. They burned like parchment, embers drifting, igniting more racks. The fire spread horizontally, vertically, roaring wind like through dry fuel. Krenshaw smelled smoke mid-pound, spun. Orange glow bloomed at the far end, growing voracious. He charged toward it, lantern high, intending to smother. But flames towered, heat blistering, boots stamped futilely as leaves above exploded in fire. Embers snowed down, roof timbers catching. The barn became furnace, heat searing lungs, smoke choking vision. Panic seized him. He raced back to the door, hammered desperately, pistol forgotten, dropped. "Open it. Open the damn door." Voice hoarse, cracking. Outside, silence answered. Flames roared louder, consuming, inexorable. Meanwhile, the quarters stirred a smoke scent on breeze, distant glow piercing night. Whispers rose, fire. Escape. Yet some lingered, watching the blaze, sensing justice's hand. Thomas reached his cabin, slipped inside. Ruth waited, eyes wide. No signs needed, the orange horizon spoke. The fire, born of human wrath, now embodied divine retribution, echoing the pillar of fire that guided yet destroyed, the blaze that purged iniquity. Sins of oppression met their wage, Krenshaw trapped in his own hell, the plantation's guilt laid bare. But the flames, once kindled, cared not for intent, they hungered indiscriminately. As the inferno raged, spiritual weight settled, redemption through destruction? Or damnation for all? The night of August 13th bled into 14th, and the reckoning had only begun. Here, the tobacco barn's shadowed interior, heavy with hanging leaves and hidden peril, where plans of fire took shape. The heat inside the tobacco barn turned infernal, a living thing that pressed against Virgil Krenshaw's skin like the breath of judgment. Smoke rolled in thick, black waves, acrid, choking, tasting of charred tobacco and melted sin. Every inhale scorched his lungs, every exhale came out as a cough that tasted like ash. Flames raced along the walls with unnatural speed, devouring the dry leaves hanging overhead, their crackle rising to a roar that drowned out thought itself. The wooden racks popped and splintered, support beams groaned under the assault, glowing orange before they surrendered. Krenshaw staggered back to the door, slamming his body against it again and again. The heavy crossbeam outside held fast, unyielding, mocking. He screamed for help, raw-throated, desperate, but the fire swallowed his voice, turning it into just another hiss in the inferno. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with soot and tears that streamed from stinging eyes. The heat blistered his arms, his neck, clothing clung to him like burning rags. He spun, searching for salvation. High windows, narrow slits meant for ventilation, mocked him from 20 feet up, no ladder, no hope. The loading door at the rear, chained and padlocked from outside, remained a solid wall of iron and wood. Trapped. Utterly, irrevocably trapped. Through the thickening haze, as flames climbed the rafters and embers rained like falling stars, something impossible appeared near the back wall. A silhouette, calm and unmoving, just beyond the fire's greedy reach. A young man, medium height, lean, dark eyes reflecting the blaze without blinking. Thomas. Krenshaw blinked hard, smoke burning his vision. Impossible. Thomas had locked him in. Thomas was outside. Yet there he stood, silent, expressionless, watching. Not with hatred, not with triumph. With the patient certainty of a man who has waited years for this moment. Crenshaw's blood turned to ice despite the furnace around him. He raised a trembling hand, pointing, mouth working in a soundless accusation. When he looked again, the figure was gone, dissolved into smoke, or never there at all. Hallucination born of terror, whiskey, guilt? Or something more, a spectral witness, the embodiment of every lash, every threat, every stolen dignity finally come to collect. He had no time to decide. The roof gave way with a thunderous crack. Timbers, weakened by centuries and now devoured by flame, collapsed in a cascade of burning debris. Sparks exploded outward like judgment's confetti. Krenshaw had time for one final, guttural scream, raw, animal, pleading, before the weight of the burning roof crushed him beneath it. Flames claimed what remained, reducing flesh, bone, and cruelty to indistinguishable ash. Outside, Thomas sat motionless on his cabin steps. The ground trembled as the barn fell, a pillar of sparks and flame shot skyward, painting the night in violent orange. Around him, doors flew open. People spilled out, men, women, children, their faces lit by the glow, eyes wide with shock and something deeper, recognition. The quarters erupted in shouts, pointing fingers, frantic motion. Buckets clattered from wells, a human chain formed, water sloshing from hand to hand toward the blaze. Futile. The fire had grown too vast, too hungry. All they could do was contain it, keep it from leaping to cabins, to the main house, to the fragile lives they still possessed. Ruth found him in the chaos. She seized his arm, pulling him close, searching his face in the flickering light. No words were needed, the truth burned in his eyes, steady as the inferno itself. "Where is Krenshaw?" She signed, hands trembling. Thomas pointed to the collapsing barn. Ruth's face drained of color. She understood. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, mother and son, bound by love and now by this irreversible act. Then resolve hardened her features. She dragged him toward the main house. One of the elderly housekeepers stood on the porch, shawl clutched tight, staring in horror. Ruth spoke aloud, voice steady despite the quake inside, "We need someone to ride to Richmond. Tell Mr. Harrove. Thomas will go." The woman nodded, dazed. Ruth turned to her son, signing urgently, "Go now. Find Harrove. Tell him there was a fire. Tell him you don't know where Krenshaw is. Stay in Richmond until tomorrow. Do you understand?" Thomas nodded once. He understood perfectly. An alibi, simple, ironclad. He had been sent away before the blaze began. He could not have been the cause. He left immediately, walking the dark road toward Richmond, the glow fading behind him like a receding nightmare. 3 hours later, on the city's outskirts, he found a small grove of pines, settled among their roots, and waited for dawn, body still, mind replaying the night's events like scripture. Back at Harrove, the fire raged until exhaustion claimed it. By first light, the tobacco barn was a blackened skeleton, charred timbers jutting like broken bones, ash drifting on the breeze. The curing crop, months of labor gone. Buried beneath the wreckage lay Virgil Krenshaw, reduced to fragments, identified later only by melted pistol and scorched brass buttons from his coat. Edmund Harrove arrived near noon, summoned by Thomas, who had found him at his Grace Street townhouse before the sun fully rose. Shock etched the planter's face, his profit in ruins, his overseer dead. The county sheriff, William Foster, 50, weathered, pragmatic, came 3 days later. 20 years on the job, he had seen every kind of fire. Most accidental. Some arson, but usually crude, obvious, torches, footprints. Confessions under duress. He questioned Harrove first. Krenshaw reliable, yields up, no known enemies. Ruth next. Thomas had seen Krenshaw enter the barn with lantern, stumbling drunk. Smoke soon after. Thomas ran for help, then was sent to Richmond. Others corroborated, same story, same details. Foster sifted ashes, lantern remnants near origin, consistent with overturned accident. Body charred beyond facial recognition, but buttons and pistol confirmed identity. Report filed, accidental fire, overturned lantern, overseer perished protecting property. Tragic. No foul play. Krenshaw was buried in the Plantation cemetery, unmarked, quickly forgotten. Harrove hired Robert Hayes, a milder man who eschewed brutality. Insurance covered the loss, a new barn rose by spring. Life resumed its rhythm, fields tended, animals fed, routines re-established. But the air had changed. A quiet electricity hummed beneath daily toil. Men like Krenshaw were not invincible. Fire could answer cruelty. 3 weeks later, a small blaze erupted in Peter's cabin. Peter, one of Crenshaw's favorite informers. Mattress smoldered in the night, he woke, extinguished it. Message sent. A week after, flames licked the kitchen house, quickly doused. Pattern emerging. Small, controlled, targeted. Harrove grew convinced the land was cursed. He retreated more often to Richmond, leaving Hayes to manage unease. Hayes, hearing the stories, walked softly, fair treatment, no whips, no threats. Whispers spread, Crenshaw's ghost? Divine retribution? But Ruth, Marcus, Hannah suspected truth. One evening after supper, Ruth pulled Thomas aside. Stop, she signed, hands shaking. They'll know it's you. I'm not setting them, he replied. Don't lie. I'm not. But I'm not stopping them either. Understanding dawned. The fires were not his. Others had learned. Marcus in Peter's cabin. Hannah in the kitchen. Perhaps more quiet acts of resistance, messages in flame. We are not powerless. We remember. We can strike back. Ideas, once kindled, spread like fire through dry leaves. By spring 1860, Harrove sold. The new owner lasted months before fleeing the constant small blazes, the atmosphere of watchful suspicion. The property changed hands 4 more times before war erupted in 1861. By 1865, the main house itself burned, large, mysterious, consuming everything. Abandoned, the land was subdivided, sold piecemeal. Thomas lived to see freedom. At 24, he left Virginia, traveled north, settled in Philadelphia. Carpenter by trade, he married Clara, also deaf, built a family, 3 children, a home, a life unshadowed by chains. He never spoke of August 14, 1859. The secret remained sealed until his death in 1903 at 62. Yet the story endured, passed through generations in kitchens, parlors, quiet gatherings. Some claimed supernatural power, others, a pact with darkness. The truest versions whispered, a young man, pushed beyond endurance, chose justice when none was offered. Today, the Tidewater site lies quiet, 40 miles south of Richmond. Stone foundations choke in weeds, the cemetery is overgrown, Crenshaw's grave lost to time. But on certain nights, when wind moves through the pines just right, people swear they smell smoke. And if you stand still, listening, you may hear it, faint, desperate pounding on wood, a voice swallowed by roaring flames. This is no simple tale of villain and victim. Thomas was denied humanity, protection, justice, so he forged his own. Did he cross into darkness, becoming what he fought? Or did he enact the only reckoning possible in a world that sanctioned cruelty? These questions linger, like smoke that never quite clears. What do you believe? Was Thomas justified, or did vengeance consume him too? Drop your thoughts below. If this story gripped you, the weight of history, the cost of silence, the fire of retribution, subscribe, turn on notifications, share it with someone who seeks the shadows behind the official record. Until the next mystery, stay watchful. The past is never truly buried.